At 18, Nora Vance owned exactly three things in this world: $41 in crumpled bills, a garbage bag full of clothes, and a cracked jade pendant that had belonged to a mother she couldn't remember. That was it. That was everything. The group home smelled like industrial cleaner and burnt toast. It always had. For 2 years, Nora had woken in the same narrow bed, listening to the radiator knock like something trying to get out. She'd been awake since 5. She always woke before the alarm on the day everything changed. Some animal part of her knew. At 7, a staff member named Karen pushed the door open. "Today's the day, Nora. You've got till noon to clear out." Nora didn't answer. She was already packed. Everything she owned fit in a black garbage bag and a backpack with a broken zipper. 3 shirts, 2 pairs of jeans, a toothbrush, a library card, and the pendant. The pendant had been her mother's. A foster mother named Mrs. Ruiz had given it to her at 10, pulled it from a manila envelope of personal effects that had followed Nora through the system like a shadow. "This belonged to your mama," she'd said. "She'd want you to have it." Nora had worn it every day since, through 6 placements, 7 beds, 100 nights of counting ceiling tiles. She clasped it around her neck now, cold against her skin, then warm. Downstairs, Karen slid a folder across the desk. Birth certificate, medical records, a yellow page of phone numbers for shelters. "You should call the housing line. Sometimes they can place people." "I'll figure it out." Karen's mouth went tight. She'd seen this scene a dozen times. The kids who walked out with a brave face and no idea what came next. She reached into a drawer and pulled out a granola bar. "Take this. And Nora, be careful out there." So Nora took the granola bar, and she walked out the front door, into a March morning that couldn't decide if it was winter or spring. The air was cold, but the sun was out, and she stood on the sidewalk with her whole life in one hand and felt the full dizzying weight of being nowhere. No apartment, no job, no family, no plan beyond getting through the day without spending money she didn't have. She walked 6 blocks to the public library, because the library was the one place that had never asked her to leave. The stacks were warm and quiet. Nobody bothered you there. Nobody looked at you like you were a problem to be solved. Nora had spent more hours in that building than anywhere else in the city. It was the closest thing to a home she'd ever known. The librarian looked up when she came through the door. Her name was Mrs. Marlowe. Gray hair pinned back, reading glasses on a chain. She had watched Nora grow up in that building, one quiet afternoon at a time. Her eyes went to the garbage bag, and she understood. "Today," Mrs. Marlowe said. Not a question. Nora nodded. "Come here. I have something for you." Mrs. Marlowe disappeared into the back office, came out holding a white envelope, held it the way you hold something you're not sure you should be holding. "This came yesterday. Addressed to you. Care of the library." A pause. "The return address is a law firm. I didn't know what to make of it." Nora took it, turned it over. The return address. Reed Ellsworth and Pratt Attorneys at Law, Millbrook. She had never heard of Millbrook. She didn't know anyone named Ellsworth. She didn't know anyone with a lawyer. She opened it carefully, pulled out a single typed page, and a small brass key taped to a square of cardboard. The letter was dated 3 weeks earlier. "Dear Ms. Vance, my name is Harold Ellsworth. I am the executor of the estate of Eleanor Hartwell, who passed away on the 14th of July last year. Mrs. Hartwell was your maternal grandmother." Nora stopped. "Read it again. Your maternal grandmother." Her hands had gone strange, far away, like they belonged to someone else. She left specific instructions in her will. Upon your 18th birthday, you were to receive full ownership of her property at 412 Sycamore Street, known locally as Rose's Table. The enclosed key opens the front door, and then, at the bottom, 3 lines that Nora would read so many times in the coming weeks that they'd wear a groove in her mind. Mrs. Hartwell asked that I convey the following. Tell her I never stopped looking. Tell her the door's open. She read the whole thing 3 times. The words didn't change, but their meaning kept sliding around, refusing to settle. A grandmother. She had a grandmother. Had. The woman was dead. Had been dead 8 months. And she had left Nora a restaurant. Nora. Mrs. Marlowe's voice came from very far away. "Are you all right? I have a grandmother," Nora said. The past tense stuck in her throat like a bone. "I had a grandmother." Mrs. Marlowe came around the desk, read over her shoulder. Her hand went to her mouth. "Millbrook. That's 3 hours south, near the old forest, small place." A pause. "She left you a restaurant. She left you a home," Mrs. Marlowe said quietly. "There's a difference." Nora stared at the key. Old brass. Tarnished. A simple cut. The kind of key that opened something solid, something real. Because here was the thing nobody had ever told her. Her whole life, the story had been the same. Told in that careful, pitying tone adults used for children whose histories were too sad to look at directly. "Your mama's people are gone, honey. There's nobody on that side. Nobody's coming." And Nora had believed it. Because when you grow up in the system, you learn fast that asking about family only leads to closed doors and lowered voices. So you stop asking, you stop hoping, you make yourself small enough to fit in the spaces nobody wants. But now, here was a key, and a letter from a dead woman who shared her blood. A woman who had apparently been looking for her the whole time. And the story Nora had carried for 14 years cracked clean down the middle. "I need to get to Millbrook," she said. Mrs. Marlowe didn't argue. She drove Nora to the bus station herself, bought the ticket before Nora could refuse, pressed it into her hand and closed her fingers around it. "You pay me back when you're settled. Go find out what's waiting for you." The bus left at 11:15. Nora sat by the window with the garbage bag on the seat beside her and the key pressing into her thigh. The city thinned and fell away. Strip malls gave way to pine. 6 lanes narrowed to 4, then 2. Red clay shoulders along the road. Farmland in long, flat stretches, broken by barns and silos and the occasional white steeple. She ate the granola bar slowly, watched the world change through fingerprinted glass, and she let herself wonder what was waiting for her. A restaurant, an empty building, the ghost of a woman she'd never met. It could be nothing. Another dead end in a life full of them. But the key was real, and the letter said her grandmother had never stopped looking, and that was more than anyone had ever offered her before. The bus pulled into Millbrook just after 2. The stop wasn't even a station, just a bench and a sign on the shoulder of the road. Nora stepped off into the afternoon sun and stood blinking, garbage bag in one hand, backpack on one shoulder. Millbrook was small. One main street, lined with brick storefronts, some occupied, some dark, a hardware store, a diner with a hand-painted sign, a post office, a church at the far end, pickup trucks angled against the curb, a few people moving slow along the sidewalks. It was quiet in a way that felt deliberate, like the town had decided long ago that hurry wasn't worth the trouble. A woman coming out of the post office pointed her the right way. 2 blocks down. Take a left. You can't miss it. And Nora found it, on the corner of Sycamore and Main, a single-story brick building with a wide front window, a painted sign above the door, Rose's Table, in faded green letters. The building was old, but not ruined. The brickwork was clean. The glass was whole. The step in front had been swept recently. Someone had been taking care of this place. Nora stood on the sidewalk and looked at it for a long time. A restaurant. Her grandmother had run restaurant. In a town Nora had never visited. For a daughter, Nora couldn't remember. And now it belonged to her. An 18-year-old with $41 and a garbage bag. She pulled the key from her pocket. Warm from her body, she climbed the single step, fitted the brass into the lock, and turned. The mechanism resisted, then gave a heavy final click. She pushed the door open. The smell hit her first. Not dust, not mildew, not the sour breath of an abandoned building. Something else entirely. Lemon oil and old wood, and underneath it the faintest ghost of cooking. Cumin, garlic, something sweet she couldn't name. The place smelled like someone had been cooking in it. Recently, even though the letter said it had been closed 3 years. Nora stepped inside. Late light slanted through the front window, laying long gold rectangles across the floor. The dining room was small, maybe 10 tables, each one covered with a white cloth protected by clear plastic. The chairs were wooden, mismatched, but solid. A long counter ran along the left wall, 6 stools, a pass-through into the kitchen behind it. Everything was clean, not just preserved, maintained, no cobwebs, no dust. The floor mopped, the windows washed. Someone had been coming in here, keeping this place alive, while it waited. But it was the walls that stopped her cold. Every wall, covered in framed photographs, dozens of them. And in photo after photo after photo, the same face looked back at her. A young woman, dark hair, a wide, helpless smile, and Nora's exact jaw, Nora's exact eyes. Her mother, Rose Hartwell, maybe 20 years old, laughing in a kitchen with flour on her nose. Rose in front of this very building on what must have been opening day, a banner behind her reading grand opening. Rose holding a baby wrapped in a yellow blanket. And Nora knew that blanket. She'd seen it once, in a photograph buried in a caseworker's file. The only image of her own infancy she'd ever found. That baby was her. Her legs went soft. She grabbed the edge of the counter and held on. Because her mother was everywhere in this room. Every wall, every surface, every corner. Eleanor had turned this restaurant into a gallery of Rose's whole life. A place where her daughter would never be forgotten. Where anyone who walked through the door would know exactly who Rose Hartwell had been, and that she had been loved, fiercely, completely. Nora moved along the wall slowly, studying each frame. Rose as a teenager, perched on a porch rail with a guitar. Rose in a graduation cap. Rose in this kitchen, stirring something in an enormous pot, looking back over her shoulder, with a grin so bright it hurt to look at. Rose holding baby Nora on her hip, both of them squinting into the sun. In every single photograph, Rose looked happy. She looked like someone who had been deeply, unquestionably, ordinarily loved, and Nora had never known her face. She reached the end of the counter, where the photograph stopped, and a clean stretch of empty wall began. There, pinned to a small corkboard, a single note, handwritten, yellow paper. This wall is for Nora's pictures when she comes home. The air went out of her chest. An empty wall, waiting for photographs that didn't exist yet, of a life she hadn't lived yet, in a place she hadn't known was hers. Eleanor had left a space for her, a literal physical space, on the wall of this restaurant, reserved for a granddaughter the whole world had told her was dead. Nora pressed her palm flat against the bare plaster, cool under her fingers, and she stayed like that for a long, long time. When she finally turned around, she saw it. On the counter, beside the register, a sealed envelope, cream-colored, thick, for Nora when she comes home. She picked it up, heavy, something stiff inside beyond the letter. A photograph, maybe. She ran her thumb under the seal. Inside a folded letter, several pages, and tucked behind it a photograph she had never seen. A woman in her 70s, silver hair, a thin, kind, weathered face, standing in the doorway of this restaurant with her arms thrown open wide. On the back in pencil, Eleanor Hartwell, waiting. Nora lowered herself onto a stool, smoothed the letter flat. The restaurant was silent. Her mother watched from every wall. The late sun poured gold through the glass, and she began to read. My dearest Nora, if you are reading this, then you found your way here, just like I always believed you would. I want you to know something before you read another word. You were wanted, you were loved, every single day of your life. Even the days you didn't know I existed, I was thinking about you. Nora's hands were shaking. She pressed them flat to steady them. The letter went on. 6 pages, front and back, in a hand that grew less steady toward the longer strokes. The hand of a woman growing tired. Eleanor wrote about Rose, the little girl who stood on a step stool and stirred whatever was on the stove, whether it needed stirring or not. The teenager who played guitar on the back porch and sang too loud and burned every batch of cookies she ever attempted. Until one afternoon at 16, something simply clicked, and Rose began to cook with the confidence of someone twice her age. Your mother's food was her language, Eleanor wrote. She could say things with a pot of soup that she could never say with words. And then the letter turned, and Nora felt the floor tilt. When your mother died, I thought the world had ended. She was 28, my only child, and I was told that you died with her. Your father called me the day after the accident. He told me neither of you had survived. I believed him. I had no reason not to. I buried my daughter, and I grieved for you both. Nora set the letter down, pressed her fingers hard against her eyes until she saw sparks. Her father had told this woman she was dead. He had picked up a phone and told a grieving mother that her granddaughter was gone. And then he had left Nora with his sister and disappeared. She picked the letter back up, but something never sat right with me. There was no funeral for you, no death certificate I could find in the county records, no grave beside your mother's. When I called your father back for details, the number was disconnected. I started asking questions, and nobody had answers. That was when I began to wonder. Eleanor described what came next. A private investigator, paid by the month, who sent back mostly dead ends. Letters to child welfare offices in 3 counties. Long drives to sit in government waiting rooms, hoping someone would check records that were sealed or lost or never filed. She did this for 14 years. I never found you, but I never stopped looking, and I never believed you were dead. A grandmother knows. I cannot explain it any better than that. I knew you were out there, and I knew that one day you would need a place to come home to. So I built one. The letter closed with one line, the one Nora read over and over until the words blurred. I'm sorry I ran out of time, but the door is open. It will always be open. Come home. Nora folded the letter against her chest, and for a moment the grief was so large it had no edges. Then a knock at the front door made her jump. Through the glass she could see a man on the step. Old, maybe 78, a full head of white hair, a face that looked carved from hardwood, a canvas jacket and heavy boots. He stood with the slightly bow-legged stance of a man who had spent his whole life on his feet. His eyes were fixed on her face, with an expression she couldn't read. She opened the door. You look like her, the man said quietly. His voice was rough, the kind that came from decades of not talking much. You look just like Rose. Who are you? Silas Crane. I own the hardware store next door. A pause. Owned. Retired now. But I've been keeping an eye on this place. His gaze moved past her into the dining room, then back to her face. Eleanor told me you'd come. I promised her I'd be here when you did. Nora stepped aside. Let him in. Silas moved through the dining room with the familiarity of a man who'd done it 1,000 times. He didn't touch anything. But his eyes lingered on the photographs, on the covered tables, on the counter where the letter still lay. You read it, he said. Not a question. Yes. He lowered himself onto a stool, the way a man sits down in his own kitchen. Then you know the bones of it. She looked for you a long time. 14 years. 14 years, Silas repeated, like he was still counting them. She came into my store one Tuesday morning, box of files under her arm, investigator reports, letters she'd written to the state. She spread them on my counter and said, Silas, I have proof my granddaughter is alive and nobody will listen to me. Did you believe her? Silas met her eyes. Eleanor Hartwell didn't lie, and she didn't chase fantasies. If she said you were alive, I believed her. I just couldn't help her prove it. He told her the practical things. Eleanor had set aside money in a separate account before she got sick. Enough to cover the electric, the water, the basic upkeep for a few years. Silas had managed it. Came by once a week, checked the locks, ran the water so the pipes wouldn't seize, mopped the floors. He'd kept this restaurant breathing for 3 years, waiting for someone who might never come. Why? Nora asked. Because I promised her. Silas said it simply. And because this place matters. When she closed the doors, it felt like someone turned the lights off on the whole street. Nora didn't know what to say to that. She stood behind the counter with her garbage bag at her feet, and her $41 in her pocket, and tried to understand what was happening to her life. 24 hours ago, she'd been counting ceiling tiles in a group home. Now she was standing in a restaurant that belonged to her, talking to an old man who had kept a promise to a dead woman for 3 years. "Are you hungry?" Silas asked. The question caught her off guard. "What? Hungry? When did you last eat?" Nora thought about the granola bar. "This morning, sort of." Silas stood. "Kitchen works, gas is on, water's on, there's dry goods in the pantry. Eleanor kept the staples stocked. I'll be back in 20 minutes. He left before she could object. So Nora went back into the kitchen, opened the pantry, bags of cornmeal and flour in airtight containers, canned beans, tomatoes, broth, salt, sugar, baking soda, basic things. But enough. She pulled the recipe binder to the prep counter, opened it to the cornbread page, and there it was, 2 hands again. The first loose and confident. Cornmeal, buttermilk, a little sugar, hot skillet. You'll know when it's done. The second, Eleanor's careful cursive, filling in the rest. The exact measurements, the temperature, the time, and, at the bottom of the page, a note that stopped Nora's breath. "This was the first recipe I perfected. It took me 11 tries. On the 12th, Silas from next door ate a piece and said, 'That's Rose's cornbread.' I sat down and cried." Nora found a cast-iron skillet hanging above the stove. She measured cornmeal into a bowl, cracked an egg, poured buttermilk, and her hands remembered motions her mind had almost forgotten. Because Mrs. Ruiz, the foster mother who'd given her the pendant, had also taught her to cook. Nothing fancy, just basics. How to fry an egg without burning the edges. How to tell when cornbread was done by the sound it made when you tapped the top. She slid the skillet into the oven to heat, mixed the batter with a wooden spoon, worn smooth by someone else's hands. When the oven hit 400, she pulled the skillet out, poured the batter in, and heard the sizzle. That meant the iron was hot enough. She set a timer, 20 minutes. The smell reached the dining room in 5. By 10 it had filled the entire building. Warm, golden, grain and butter and something harder to name. Comfort, memory, the smell of food made by someone who cared whether you ate. Silas came back carrying a paper bag, set it on the counter without a word. Inside 2 jars of homemade blackberry jam, a tub of butter, a carton of sweet tea. He sat down and waited. When the timer went off, Nora pulled the cornbread from the oven. Golden on top, dark at the edges where the batter had hit the screaming iron. She cut a wedge, set it on a plate, slid it across the counter. Silas didn't speak. He broke the wedge in half, spread butter, took a bite. Then he closed his eyes and sat very still. When he opened them, they were wet. "That's her," he said. "That's Eleanor." They ate in silence until the pan was empty, and, for the first time in years, Nora felt like she had done something that mattered. But there was a room she hadn't seen yet. Silas pointed her to it. A small office behind the kitchen, a desk, a filing cabinet, a bookshelf, a single window looking out on the back alley. The desk was buried under papers neatly organized, secured with rubber bands. "Eleanor spent a lot of time in there," Silas said from the doorway. "Especially toward the end. You should see it." He paused. "Home isn't where they keep you, Nora. It's where somebody kept a place for you." And then he left her to it. Nora sat down at her grandmother's desk, The papers told the story. The letter had only outlined. She found the investigator reports first, thick folders organized by year. The earliest dated 14 years back, just months after Rose died. Subject claims granddaughter may be alive despite reported death. No death certificate filed in county of accident. Recommend further investigation. Folder after folder. Dead ends, false leads, invoices for hours of work that produced nothing. Letters Eleanor had written to the state, each more urgent than the last. Form letters that came back saying her inquiry had been noted. Requests filed with family courts in 4 counties. All denied or unanswered. 14 years of paper. 14 years of a woman sitting at this desk, writing letters, making calls, spending money she probably didn't have, searching for a granddaughter who was alive the entire time, living in foster homes less than 200 miles north. And then at the bottom of the filing cabinet's first drawer, Nora found something that didn't fit. A bank statement. She almost set it aside, except a number had been circled in red ink, and beside it in Eleanor's hand a single word. Mortgage. Nora went still. She pulled the rest of the folder out and read. Because the restaurant wasn't free and clear. Not anymore. In the last 2 years of her life, as the investigators got more expensive and the medical bills started coming, Eleanor had borrowed against the building. Twice, and the loan was still open. There was a letter from the bank, recent, dated only weeks ago, addressed to the estate. Outstanding balance, due. Property subject to foreclosure proceedings if payment is not received within 90 days of this notice. 90 days. Nora set the letter on the desk, pressed it flat. Her heart was going hard now. So that was it. That was the catch. There was always a catch. She'd lived 18 years long enough to know that nothing came free. Not a key. Not a wall with her name on it, not a grandmother who loved her from beyond the grave. She had a restaurant, and 90 days to pay off a debt she had no way to pay, with $41 and a garbage bag. She put her head in her hands, and that was when she heard it. A car, pulling up out front, the crunch of gravel, the engine cutting off. She lifted her head. Silas had gone home an hour ago. Ruth, the diner woman, hadn't come by yet. Nobody in this town knew her. Nobody had a reason to come. Nora walked back through the kitchen, through the dining room, to the front window. A man was getting out of the car. Older, maybe 50, worn jacket, a few days of gray stubble. He stood on the sidewalk and looked up at the sign. Rose's Table, and something crossed his face that Nora couldn't name. Something between hunger and grief. He walked toward the door, and the closer he got, the colder Nora went. Because she knew that walk. She knew that jaw. She had seen it in exactly one photograph, in exactly one caseworker's file, a long time ago. She knew that face. It was older now, heavier, ruined around the eyes, but it was the same face. The man stopped at the door, looked through the glass, saw her standing there in the gold evening light with her mother's pendant at her throat and her mother's face on every wall behind her, and his mouth opened, and one word came out muffled through the glass, soft as a confession. Rose. But Nora's mother had been dead for 14 years, which meant the man at the door wasn't looking at Rose. He was looking at her, and the man who had told the world she was dead, the man who had signed her away and vanished without a trace, was standing on the other side of the only door her grandmother had ever left open for her. Her father had come home. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The glass door stood between them. Nora on the inside in the gold evening light with her mother's face on every wall. The man on the outside in the dark looking at her like she was a ghost, because to him she was. Then she crossed the room and unlocked the door. She didn't decide to. Her hand just did it. Some old reflex from a life where you opened doors when adults stood behind them, where you did what you were told. She pulled it open. "You're not Rose," he said. "No, you're—" His voice broke. He couldn't finish. "I'm Nora." And there it was. Her name, in the air between them. The name on a death certificate she didn't yet know existed. Desmond Vance stared at his daughter. His mouth worked. Nothing came out. He had imagined this moment maybe. Or maybe he'd spent 14 years making sure he never had to. "You got big," he finally said, which was such a small, stupid thing to say to a daughter you erased. You got big. As if she'd been at summer camp. As if he'd dropped her off at a sleepover and lost track of time. 14 years of time. "You should come in," Nora said, because she didn't know what else to say, because the man at the door was her father, because some broken, hopeful part of her, the part she hated, still wanted to hear what he'd say. He came in slow. His eyes went to the walls, to Rose. Everywhere Rose. And something passed over his face. Pain, maybe, or the performance of it. Nora couldn't tell yet. She would learn to. "She did all this," he said softly. "Eleanor. You knew her. I knew her a little. Long time ago." He turned slow, taking in the gallery. "She always was sentimental. Sentimental. That was the word he chose. For a woman who spent 14 years and every dollar she had searching for the granddaughter he'd buried on paper. "How did you know I was here?" Nora asked. Desmond didn't answer right away. He found a stool, sat down heavily, the same stool Silas had sat in an hour ago. And the wrongness of that this man in that seat made Nora's stomach turn. "Word gets around," he said. "Heard the old lady passed. Heard she left the place to somebody." He looked up. "Took me a while to figure out the somebody was you. Took you 14 years to figure out I was alive. It came out flat. Cold." She surprised herself. Desmond flinched. "Nora, you told her I was dead." He went still. "You called my grandmother the day after Mom died, and you told her I died too. It wasn't like that. Then what was it like?" And there it was. The first volley. Ping, pong. Two strangers who shared blood batting the worst thing in the world back and forth across a counter. Desmond rubbed his face with both hands. "I was a mess, all right. Your mother was gone. I had a 4-year-old. No money, no job. I couldn't." He stopped, started again. "I couldn't do it. I knew I couldn't do it. And Eleanor, she'd have taken you in a heartbeat. But she'd have taken you from me, and I couldn't. So you killed me instead." "I didn't. On paper. You killed me on paper, so nobody would look." The words hung there, because she didn't actually know that yet. Not the paper part. She was guessing, reaching, throwing the worst thing she could imagine and watching to see if it landed. It landed. Desmond's face did something complicated, something that confirmed everything before he said a single word, and Nora's stomach dropped through the floor, because she'd been bluffing, and he'd just told her she was right. "It's late," Desmond said suddenly, standing. "I've got a room at the motel on the highway. We should talk when it's not so much. Tomorrow. You're leaving. I'm coming back. I promise." He moved toward the door, stopped, looked back at her, and for 1 second his face was almost soft, almost human. "Nora, I'm glad you're alive. I am. Whatever you think of me, I'm glad." And then he was gone, the door swinging shut behind him. The car starting, the taillights pulling away into the dark, leaving Nora alone in a restaurant full of her dead mother's photographs, with a mortgage she couldn't pay, and a father she couldn't read, and a feeling in her gut like she just opened a door she should have left locked. She did not sleep that night. She sat at Eleanor's desk until the window went black, and then she sat in the dark. The bank letter lay where she'd left it. 90 days. The investigator files surrounded her like the walls of a fort built by a woman who lost, and she thought about the look on Desmond's face when she said on paper, because there was something there, something she hadn't seen yet, and she had spent her whole life learning to find the thing nobody wanted her to find. So she opened the filing cabinet again. Top drawer, investigator reports. She'd seen those. Second drawer, tax records, business papers, the mortgage folder she'd already found. Third drawer. The third drawer, stuck. She had to work it. And when it finally slid open, there was a single folder at the very back. Plain, unlabeled, worn soft at the edges like it had been opened and closed 1,000 times. Nora pulled it out, set it on the desk, opened it, and the world stopped. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a photocopy, faded, official, a death certificate. The name on it was Nora Vance, date of death, the same day as the accident, the day her mother died, cause of death, motor vehicle collision, filed by Desmond Vance, her father. Nora stared at it, at her own name, her own birthday, declared dead at 4 years old by a man who had then handed her to his sister and disappeared into the world. I hadn't just lied. He hadn't just told a grieving woman a terrible thing on the phone. He had made it official. He had walked into a government office and filed a piece of paper that killed her, that erased her from every search, from every record, from the one person on earth who would have come for her, who would have taken her home, who would have loved her, because that was why Eleanor never found her. 14 years. Every investigator, every letter, every drive to the city, they all hit the same wall. The child is deceased. See certificate. Case closed. A dead girl doesn't show up in the foster system. A dead girl isn't anyone's to find. Nora's hands shook so hard the paper rattled. She thought about the look on his face an hour ago. "I'm glad you're alive." As if that was the gift. As if being glad now made up for the 14 years he'd made sure no one came. And she thought about something worse. He was back. Now. Suddenly. After all this time. Right when Eleanor died and left a building with a name on the deed. Word gets around. Heard she left the place to somebody. He hadn't come back for her. He'd come back for the restaurant. Nora put the death certificate down, pressed it flat, and for the first time in years she felt something hot and clean and terrible move through her. Not grief. Grief she knew. This was anger. She must have slept eventually, because she woke on the office cot with the gray light coming through the alley window and Silas's voice in the dining room. "Nora, you in here?" She came out. He was at the counter, 2 paper cups of coffee and a brown bag in front of him. He took one look at her face and set the cups down, very carefully. What happened? So she told him. All of it. The car, the man, the name on the door, Rose, and then the third drawer, and the photocopy, and the name on the certificate. That was her own. Silas listened without moving, his big weathered hands flat on the counter. When she finished, he was quiet a long time. "Eleanor showed me that document," he finally said. "6 years ago. Got a copy through one of her court filings. She sat right where you're sitting, and she said, 'Silas, somebody forged my granddaughter's death.' You knew." "I knew there was paper. I didn't know the girl on it would ever walk through that door." He looked at her. "She took it to a lawyer. The lawyer said proving a death certificate was false could take years. And even if she did, there was no guarantee the state would help her find a living child in the system." A pause. She kept looking anyway. 14 years. For a girl the world told her was dead. And she never stopped. "He's coming back today," Nora said. "He said he wants to talk." Silas's jaw tightened. What does a man like that want to talk about? "I don't know. The restaurant, I think." "Then you don't talk to him alone." Silas stood. "Not about anything that matters. You hear me?" She heard him. But there was someone she needed to talk to first. Someone whose silence had cost her just as much. Her aunt, Adeline Vance. Her father's sister. The woman who had kept her for 11 months and then handed her to the state and walked away. The woman who Nora was beginning to understand must have known the truth, known the certificate was a lie, known a grandmother was out there searching and said nothing for 12 years. The lawyer. Mr. Ellsworth found the number. He called it back to Nora that afternoon, his voice careful and measured. "Eleanor's file had some information on your father's family. Use it however you need. And Nora Eleanor prepaid my services for a full year. Don't hesitate." Nora wrote the number on the back of a napkin and carried it in her pocket for 2 days before she used it. When she finally sat on the front step in the dying light and dialed the phone, rang 4 times. 5. She was about to hang up. Then a woman answered. "Hello?" The voice was cautious, tired, worn thin. "Adeline." Silence, then barely above a whisper. "Nora, how did you know?" "Because nobody else would call me and sound like that." A long shaking breath. "I've been waiting for this call. I didn't know when, but I knew it would come. I'm at the restaurant, Eleanor's restaurant, in Millbrook." "I know about the restaurant. I heard she died. I didn't go to the funeral." "Why not?" Adeline didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice was flat, hollowed out. "Because I didn't have the right. I knew what your father did. I knew what that woman spent her life doing, and I let it happen." Nora gripped the phone so hard her knuckles ached. "I need you to come here," she said. "I need you to tell me why, to my face." Another silence. Longer. "When?" Adeline said. "Saturday." "I'll be there." The line went dead. The days between the phone call and Saturday were strange, because the town began to move around her. Silas showed up the first morning with a toolbox and a younger man from the church. They fixed the front door hinge that had been sticking, replaced 2 ceiling tiles bowed from old moisture. The churchman looked at the faded sign and said he could touch up the green. Silas told him to go ahead. A woman named Ruth ran the diner across the street. She came over with a box of kitchen things, mixing bowls, wooden spoons, a roll of sharp knives. "These were sitting in my storage room," she said, which Nora was fairly sure was a lie because the knives still had stickers on them. A farmer named Carol, no relation to anyone, just a woman with too many chickens, dropped off a flat of eggs and a gallon of milk. "Eleanor bought eggs from me every week for 17 years, she said. I'll bring more on Tuesdays." By the second evening, the cooler that had been empty for 3 years held eggs and milk and butter. The sign over the door gleamed fresh green. Someone had left a potted geranium on the step. Nora stood in the middle of the dining room and didn't understand it. She had been in this town less than a week. She hadn't asked anyone for anything, and strangers were bringing food and fixing things and treating this building like it belonged to all of them. Silas explained it in one sentence. "Eleanor fed this town for 17 years. You think they forgot?" And Nora thought, but they don't know about the mortgage. Because a hinge and a flat of eggs and a fresh coat of paint don't pay off a bank. 90 days. The clock was running, and the kindness of strangers, however warm, doesn't make a foreclosure stop. But she didn't say that. She just said thank you, and meant it more than she could say. On Friday evening, Nora was washing dishes when she heard a car. Too early for Saturday. She dried her hands and went to the window. A modest sedan, dusty from the highway, and a woman behind the wheel sitting very still like she couldn't make herself open the door. Adeline Vance was smaller than Nora had imagined. Late 40s, but she looked older. Thin, gray hair cut short, deep lines bracketing her mouth. She clutched her purse with both hands like it was the only thing keeping her standing. She got out, looked at the sign, and didn't move. Nora opened the door. They stared at each other across the sidewalk, and Nora waited for the rage. She'd expected it. She'd carried it for years, for being given up, for being forgotten. She'd expected the sight of this woman to set it loose. But what she felt was quieter than that. She felt tired. She felt like she was looking at someone who was already punishing herself more than Nora ever could. "You came early," Nora said. "I couldn't sleep." Adeline's eyes went past her to the photographs, to Rose, and her face crumpled just for a second. "You look like her." "People keep saying that. Come in." Adeline came in slow, eyes moving over the dining room, the walls, the counter, the kitchen beyond. She stopped at the photo of Rose holding baby Nora in the yellow blanket, and stood there a long time. "She was a good mother," Adeline said. "Your mama loved you more than anything in this world. I want you to know that. Sit down." Adeline sat. Nora stood behind the counter. The counter between them felt necessary. A border, close enough to talk, far enough to stay safe. "Tell me," Nora said. Adeline set her purse down, folded her hands, looked at them while she talked. "When your father left you with me, I was a wreck. My husband had walked out. I was behind on rent. I was drinking too much. I told Desmond I couldn't take a child. He said it'd just be a few weeks. He left, and he never came back." "When did he tell Eleanor I was dead?" "Right after the accident. He called her the day after and said neither of you made it. She swallowed. I didn't find out about the call till later. A year, maybe. By then you were already in the system. And when you found out, Adeline's hands tightened on each other, white knuckles. I told myself it was too late, that the lie was already done, and undoing it wouldn't help anybody. Eleanor thought you were dead. You were in foster care, and I convinced myself you were better off with the state than with me, or with a grandmother you'd never met. Her voice cracked clean down the middle. I was wrong. I knew I was wrong even then, but admitting it meant admitting what I'd done. That I gave up my brother's daughter because I couldn't handle her, and I couldn't face that. You knew Eleanor was looking for me. Adeline's head dropped. I heard, through people, I heard she'd hired investigators, that she was writing letters. I told myself she'd give up. She didn't. No. A whisper. She didn't. Nora looked at this small broken woman, confessing sins she'd carried for over a decade, and she understood in that moment that Adeline was not a monster, not the villain Nora had built in her mind through all those years and all those beds. She was a person who'd been handed something she couldn't carry, and had set it down, and walked away, and spent every single day since knowing she should have tried harder. Nora did not forgive her. The word was too big, too final for whatever this was. But she didn't send her away either. Are you hungry? Nora asked. Adeline looked up, eyes red. What? I'm going to cook. You can stay if you want. They cooked side by side. Black-eyed pea soup, cornbread. Adeline peeled carrots like it was the only useful thing she'd been allowed to do in years. They didn't talk about forgiveness. They talked about Rose, how she hummed off-key when she cooked, how she put hot sauce on everything, even cereal, which Eleanor thought was a sin. And for a little while, the kitchen was almost warm, until the front door opened, without a knock. Desmond walked in. He stopped when he saw Adeline. Something shifted in his face. The two of them stared at each other across the dining room, brother and sister, and a whole history passed between them that Nora couldn't read. Addie, Desmond said. Des. Adeline's voice had gone cold. What are you doing here? Same as you, I'd guess. He smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. Family reunion. But he wasn't looking at his sister. He was looking past her, at the walls, at the building, with the eyes of a man counting something. And then he reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded sheet of paper and set it on the counter slow, like he was laying down a winning card. I came back to do right by you, Nora, he said. I did, but I talked to a lawyer on the way down, and there's a problem with all this. What problem? This. He tapped the folded paper. There's a death certificate on file. Says Nora Vance died 14 years ago. He spread his hands, almost apologetic. And the thing is, a dead girl can't inherit a building. Legally speaking, the estate's a mess. Eleanor left it to a granddaughter the state has on record as deceased. Nora's blood went to ice because she finally understood. He hadn't come back for her. He hadn't even come back just for the restaurant. He'd come back to use the lie. His own lie. The piece of paper he'd filed 14 years ago to erase her. He was going to use it now to take the one thing her grandmother had left her. He was going to kill her on paper a second time, and reach in and take the building while the estate untangled. You filed that certificate, Nora said. Her voice was very quiet. You killed me. and now you want to use it to steal her restaurant." Desmond's smile didn't waver. "I'm trying to help. Somebody's got to sort out the legal side. Might as well be next of kin." He shrugged. "I'd hate to see the bank just take it. I heard there's a mortgage." And there it was. He knew about the mortgage. Of course he did. He'd done his homework. He wasn't a desperate father stumbling home. He was a man who'd found a loophole shaped like his own daughter's name. "Get out," Adeline said. "Addie, get out, Des." She was on her feet now, shaking. "You don't get to do this twice." He looked between them, sister and daughter, and the warmth he'd performed all evening drained out of his face, leaving something flatter, colder, the real thing underneath. "You'll be hearing from my lawyer," he said, and he left. The door swung shut. The car started. The taillights pulled away into the dark, and Nora stood in the silent kitchen with the soup going cold, and her aunt trembling beside her, and 90 days on a clock, and a father using her own forged death to take her grandmother's life's work. She wanted to scream. She wanted to break something. She wanted to lie down on the floor of this restaurant her mother built and never get up. Instead, she went to the office, because there was one place she hadn't finished looking. One drawer of Eleanor's she hadn't emptied, and Eleanor Hartwell had spent 14 years one step behind a lie. Eleanor Hartwell did not lose quietly. Nora sat at the desk and pulled out the bottom drawer, and found beneath the tax folders a black leather journal, worn soft, a ribbon marker. She opened it. 14 years of entries, recipes and dead ends, court filings and grief. A little girl came in today and ate cornbread at the counter, and I cried in the kitchen for 10 minutes. But it was the back of the journal that stopped her. The last 20 pages weren't a journal at all. They were a case. Eleanor had documented everything. Dates, the disconnected phone number, the missing funeral, a copy of the forged certificate with a yellow sticky note in her shaking hand. The signature is Desmond's. Compare to the lease he signed, the old apartment copy attached. A man cannot inherit by killing the heir on paper. If he ever comes for this place, give all of this to a lawyer. And tucked into the very back, folded, sealed, a second document on heavy legal paper signed and witnessed and dated 2 months before Eleanor died. A codicil, an amendment to her will. In the event my granddaughter Nora is challenged on grounds of the fraudulent death record, the following provisions apply. Eleanor had seen this coming from beyond the grave. She had known that one day a man might walk through that open door and try to use his own lie to take everything, and she had left her granddaughter exactly what she needed to stop him. Nora held the journal against her chest, and for the first time since the car pulled up out front, she was not afraid, because her grandmother had been one step behind Desmond for 14 years. But she had finished one step ahead. Mr. Ellsworth read the codicil twice. He was a careful man. Gray suit, half glasses, the kind of lawyer who measured his words like flour. He sat at Eleanor's desk with the journal open in front of him and the forged certificate beside it and the sealed legal pages laid out flat, and for a long time he said nothing at all. Then he took off his glasses. "Your grandmother," he said slowly, "was the most stubborn client I ever had. And I mean that as the highest compliment I know how to give." "Does it work?" Nora asked. What she left. Does it stop him? Ellsworth tapped the certificate. This forgery. She had a handwriting comparison done, privately, 3 years ago. The signature matches your father's hand on 2 other documents. That's fraud. Filing a false death record is a crime in this state no matter how old it is. He moved to the codicil. And this. She names you directly, provides for exactly this challenge. She left a sworn statement asserting you are alive, witnessed, and notarized. He looked up. Your father walked in here with a loophole. Eleanor closed it 2 months before she died. So I keep the restaurant. You keep the restaurant. A pause. But Nora, there's the other matter. Because there was always the other matter. The mortgage, 90 days, now down to 61. The codicil could save her from her father. It could not save her from the bank. A clear title to a building you can't afford is still a building the bank takes. How much? Nora said. Ellsworth told her the number. It was more money than Nora had ever seen written down. More money than she could earn in years. And she had $41. She had a recipe binder, and a town full of kind strangers, and 61 days. She sat down hard on the office cot. What do I do? She said. Not really a question, more like a thing falling out of her. Ellsworth folded his glasses. You do what your grandmother did, he said. You refuse to quit, and you let people help you. But Nora didn't know how to let people help her, because that was the thing nobody understood about kids who grow up in the system. You learn that help has a price, that kindness runs out, that the moment you lean on someone, the floor disappears, so you don't lean. You carry your own bag. You count your own ceiling tiles. You make yourself small and useful, and you never ever ask. And now a woman she'd never met was asking her to do the one thing she'd spent 18 years learning not to do. The first thing she did was deal with Desmond. She didn't ambush him. She didn't scream. She had Ellsworth draft a letter. Calm, clinical. It laid out the codicil, the handwriting analysis, the fact that a false death certificate was a crime with his name on it. And it offered him one thing. A choice. Withdraw the challenge. Sign away any claim to the estate. Leave Millbrook and never come back. And the forgery stays in a drawer. Or don't. And the same drawer goes to the district attorney. He came one last time. Stood in the doorway of the restaurant his mother-in-law built. Older than ever in the morning light. And Nora stood behind the counter where she always stood now and slid the letter across to him. He read it. His jaw worked. You'd put your own father in jail, he said. You put me in a grave, Nora said. On paper, when I was 4. I was drowning. I know. And she meant it. Because she did know what drowning looked like. She'd watched a lot of adults drown. But you didn't reach for me. You reached for the easiest way to make me disappear. And then you came back 14 years later to do it again. He had nothing to say to that, because there was nothing. Sign it, Nora said, and go. That's the kindest thing I have left for you. It's more than you gave me. Desmond Vance looked at his daughter for a long moment. At her mother's face, behind her on every wall, at her mother's pendant at her throat, and whatever was left of the man who'd once held a baby in a yellow blanket, flickered just for a second behind his eyes. Then he picked up the pen. He signed, and he walked out the door for the last time. No car chase, no final speech, Just an old man getting into a dusty sedan and pulling away. And the strange, hollow truth that letting him go didn't feel like victory. It felt like setting down something heavy she'd been carrying her whole life without knowing its weight. Adeline was standing in the kitchen doorway. She'd heard all of it. "You could have ruined him," she said quietly. "I know. Why didn't you?" Nora thought about it. About 14 years of beds that weren't hers. About a grandmother who left a wall empty instead of a curse. "Because she didn't raise me," Nora said. "But I think she's the only person who ever tried to, and she wouldn't have wanted me to spend my life holding a grudge in one hand. There's no room left for anything else if you do that." She looked at her aunt. "I learned that this week, the hard way." Adeline started to cry. Quiet. The kind of crying that comes from somewhere very old. And Nora let her. That left the bank. 60 days, then 50. The number on the clock did not care how brave anyone was. And Nora, who had cooked every recipe in the binder twice over, who had cleaned every surface and washed every window, stood in the dining room one night and finally let herself feel the size of it. She was going to lose it. She had a restaurant her mother built with her hands and her grandmother saved with her whole life, and she was going to watch a bank padlock the door and put a sign in the window. And there was nothing $41 and a recipe binder could do about it. She told Silas, because he came every morning at 7:30 and sat in the third stool from the left, and she'd started telling him things. He didn't say anything for a while. He just drank his coffee, and then he set the cup down. "How long have you known about this?" "Since the first night." "And you've been carrying it alone all this time?" "I carry things alone," Nora said. "It's what I do." Silas looked at her, long and steady, and something in his weathered face went soft and fierce at the same time. "Not in this town," he said. "Not anymore." She didn't understand what he meant. Not until Saturday, because Silas Crane, it turned out, had been making phone calls. Saturday morning, Nora unlocked the door at 11, the way she had every day, propping it open to the cool spring air. She expected the usual. A few regulars, Ruth from across the street, maybe the egg farmer. Instead, she opened the door to a line. It went down the sidewalk, past the hardware store, around the corner, an older couple at the front, then a young family, then a man in coveralls, then two women with a casserole dish between them. Faces she knew, faces she didn't. The whole street, it seemed. The whole town. And Ruth was standing on the step with a metal cash box in her hands and tears already running down her face. "What is this?" Nora said. "This," Ruth said, "is Eleanor's town paying her back." Because Silas had told them, all of them, about the mortgage, about the clock, and this town, the one Eleanor Hartwell had fed for 17 years, the one she'd slid extra cobbler to on hard days and learned every name in this town, had decided that her granddaughter was not going to lose the restaurant. They came in all day, they ate, and they paid. They paid for cornbread, and they left 20s under the plates. They bought soup and dropped checks in the cash box. The man in coveralls handed Nora an envelope and said Eleanor floated me for 6 months when my back went out. Tell her we're square. And then he remembered she was gone, and he had to look away. A woman pressed bills into Nora's hand and said, "She catered my mother's funeral and wouldn't take a dime." A teenager emptied a jar of lawn mowing money onto the counter. "She gave me free pie every Friday for a year," said growing boys need pie. It went on for hours, the cash box filled, then a second one. Ruth kept a tally on a legal pad, and every hour she'd glance at the number and shake her head and wipe her eyes and keep going. And Nora moved between the kitchen and the dining room carrying plate after plate, and somewhere around the fourth hour, she stopped being able to hold it in. She set a bowl of soup in front of an old woman who'd known Rose as a girl, and the woman caught her wrist and said, "Honey, your grandmother talked about you like you were already here, like you just stepped out for a minute. She set a place for you every Sunday," and Nora had to go stand in the walk-in cooler for a while, because this was the thing she had never learned, the thing the system had taught her to be afraid of. She had spent her whole life believing that kindness ran out, that help had a price, that if you leaned, the floor gave way. And here was a whole town leaning back, holding the floor up. For a girl most of them had met a week ago, because of a woman who'd loved them for 17 years. By the end of the day, when the last customer had gone and the door was finally closed, Ruth set the legal pad on the counter and slid it toward Nora. It was enough, not just close, enough, with a little left over. Nora looked at the number, and then she looked at Silas sitting in his stool, calm as ever, like he'd known all along it would work. "You did this," she said. "No," Silas said. "She did. 17 years ago. I just made the phone calls." Nora called Mr. Ellsworth that night. The bank was paid. The certificate stayed in its drawer. The codicil did its quiet work. And the title to Rose's table belonged free and clear to an 18-year-old who had arrived in town 6 weeks earlier with $41 and a garbage bag. The restaurant opened for good that spring. 5 days a week, lunch and dinner, a small menu. 8 things, all of them Rose's written in 2 hands in a laminated binder. The black-eyed pea soup, the pot roast people drove 30 miles for. The peach cobbler, Nora finally got right on her 6th try, the way Eleanor said she would. Silas came every morning at 7:30. Third stool from the left. Coffee and the newspaper. Some mornings they talked, some mornings they didn't. Both kinds were good. Adeline came on Saturdays. Drove down from the city, worked the lunch shift, cleared tables, washed dishes. They never said the word forgiveness. They didn't need to. Forgiveness wasn't a moment. It was a Saturday, and then another Saturday, and then 100 of them. It was a woman showing up over and over to do the small, useful work of earning back a place in someone's life. And it was a girl letting her. Some Saturdays, Adeline told Nora a story about Rose. A small one. The way she hummed off key. The way she sang in the car. The way she put hot sauce on everything. And each story made Rose a little more real. A little less like a face on a wall. A little more like a mother. Nora did not call Adeline family, not yet, but she stopped thinking of her as the woman who gave her up, and started thinking of her as the woman who kept coming back. And then, on a Tuesday, in early summer, after the lunch rush had settled into the warm hum of full stomachs and second cups of coffee, the front door opened, and a girl walked in, maybe 16, thin, wearing a jacket too light for the weather. She stood just inside the door and looked around with wide, careful eyes, measuring the room, counting the exits, deciding whether a place was safe. And Nora knew that look. She'd worn it every time she walked into a new home, a new school, a new room that wasn't hers. The look of a kid who'd learned that no place was safe until proven otherwise, and most places never were. The girl didn't sit. She hovered near the door, hands shoved in her pockets, eyes moving from the photographs to the counter to the kitchen and back. Nora came out from behind the counter. "You hungry?" The girl's eyes snapped to her, wary. "I don't have money." "Didn't ask if you had money. Asked if you were hungry." A beat, then a small, careful nod. "Sit wherever you want," Nora said. The girl chose the stool at the far end, the one closest to the door, the escape seat. Nora knew that one too. She brought a bowl of soup, a thick square of cornbread, a glass of sweet tea. Set it down without ceremony, and then she walked away. Because she knew, what you need first is food. What you need second is to be left alone to eat it without anybody watching your face while you do. The girl ate everything. Slow at first, then fast, the way you eat when you're not sure where the next meal comes from. Nora refilled the bowl without being asked. When the girl finally slowed down, Nora sat on the stool beside her. "What's your name?" "Tessa." A pause. "I'm staying with my cousin. She's not around much." And Nora looked at this girl. The thin jacket, the careful eyes, the elbows on the counter of a restaurant she'd walked into, because the door was open and the food smelled like somebody cared. And she saw herself, not a mirror, not a copy, but the same essential thing, a kid who needed somebody to leave a door open. "I need help around here," Nora said. "Dishes, sweeping. Can't pay much yet, but you get fed." Tessa's eyes went wide. "You serious?" "I'm serious. Come Monday after school." The girl left with a container of soup and half a loaf of cornbread wrapped in foil, and Nora watched her go down the sidewalk, and she felt the whole shape of it settle onto her shoulders. Not a burden, a purpose. Silas watched the whole thing from his stool. He didn't say anything, but when the door closed behind the girl, he nodded once, slow, the way a man nods when he sees something come full circle. "That's what she'd have done," he said. "Eleanor, exact same thing." "I know," Nora said. That night after the kitchen was clean and the cooler was humming and the photographs watched from the walls, Nora sat down at her grandmother's desk. She pulled a sheet of paper from the printer. She picked up a pen, and she wrote a letter. "Dear Eleanor, my name is Nora. I'm your granddaughter. I'm sorry it took me so long to get here." The door was open. "Just like you said. The recipes are in the binder. The photographs are on the wall. Silas is at the counter every morning. The town remembers you. They paid your debt for me because of everything you did for them. You taught me something I never learned anywhere else. That kindness doesn't run out. It comes back. Sometimes years later, sometimes after you're gone. But it comes back. You looked for me for 14 years. You died 8 months before I got here. I'll never forgive that part. Not the dying, just the timing. But I remember you, even though we never met, because you left yourself in every corner of this place, in every recipe, in every photograph, in a wall you left empty for a girl the whole world swore was dead. I'm here now. I came home." She folded the letter, and she walked it to the filing cabinet, and she placed it in the bottom drawer beside the journal, beside 14 years of investigator reports and court filings and unanswered letters. One more piece of paper in a drawer full of them. But this one was different. This one was an answer. Then she walked back through the kitchen and the dining room to the front of the restaurant, and she looked at the wall by the end of the counter, the one that had been empty the day she arrived, the one with the yellow note. "This wall is for Nora's pictures when she comes home." It wasn't empty anymore. Silas had taken a photograph of her on opening day, standing behind the counter, dish towel over her shoulder, flower on her hands, caught mid-laugh at something Ruth had said. He'd framed it himself, hung it in the center of the wall. The first picture, in a space that had waited 14 years to be filled. Nora turned off the dining room lights. She checked the stove, checked the cooler, wiped the counter one last time. And she went to the small room behind the office where she slept now, in a real bed that had replaced the cot in a room that was finally, undeniably hers. On the nightstand sat two small things, a brass key and a cracked jade pendant, one from a grandmother she never met, one from a mother she couldn't remember, both given to her by women who loved her before she ever knew she was loved. She turned off the light, and outside on Sycamore Street the sign over the door glowed faintly in the dark. Rose's Table, the way it had every night that Eleanor ran it, the way it would every night that Nora did. Because the door was locked, but it was not closed. It would never be closed again. And somewhere out there, another girl with a too thin jacket and a too careful face was walking through a cold night toward a town she'd never heard of, not knowing yet that a light had been left on for her, that a place had been set, that a wall stood ready for her picture, because that is the thing about a kindness when it is real and stubborn and refuses to die. It does not end with the person who started it. It just keeps finding its way home.